Hello, gentle listener. Gentle is a character attribute I am ascribing to you with the hope that you will receive my words gently and treat me in kind. I repeated kind twice, actually 3 times now, so that the possibility of being treated that way is seated in your soul. Clearly, this is a one-sided transaction, but I am a believer that positive energy put out into the universe floats around out there until it finds purchase. This is to say, I'll receive it someday, so fire away. Thank you. It is me, Josh Bloom, and why am I asking for a gentle reception today as I sit here at the nearly vacant P? It's not a big deal really, but we are now into the hot weather here in New York, and so I have been going for my daily walk around 6:30 a.m. when it is still relatively cool, and after doing that, running errands, eating breakfast, showering, and dealing with the other daily rituals and tasks that exist in the lives of modern men who didn't ask for it, I am already pretty pooped as I write this at 11:27 a.m. on Sunday. To quickly update, I am still negotiating a second book contract and also having misgivings about whether this is the right working relationship to be getting into. I know myself well enough to realize that my current attitude could be affecting that outlook, however, so I am not going to make any decisions based on information I do not have. I said last week if I don't bring it up again, it means I ruined the relationship, but as it stands, I have yet to do that. To quickly update again, I had the bean spilling session with my therapist that I alluded to last time, and frankly, it was actually harder to speak my darkest truths to myself, which I had done in the days leading up to the session than it was on the day. My therapist wasn't particularly thrown and seemed to think my issues centered around childhood shame rather than the deception, manipulation, and obsession that created and masked that shame. I don't have a problem with being a mild deviant on the correct side of the law, but I do have a problem with how not being able to accept and integrate that part of my personality has caused a disruption in my character over the course of my late adolescence and adulthood. Essentially, I hit the wall when I realized that I could not become the writer I aspired to be without taking this step. If this sounds vague, I'm sorry. This is not the forum for details, and why would I give that away for free anyway? In any case, I am better now than I was then, and even today's vague description has helped me feel a little more energized. I don't think I would have been able to get this far in the telling of it all if not for feeling assured I would be heard gently, as requested above. Thank you. Speaking of specifics, this is the latest edition of the 1,461 Days of Ignoring with Josh Bloom podcast, the weekly compilation of my daily 1,461 Days of Ignoring the Trump administration posts that originate on TikTok and are then reposted on YouTube, Instagram, and Substack. I continue to trudge forth with this endeavor because it is more than a public or personal service dedicated to mindfulness, optimism, and hope. It is an ongoing art project that must be completed or otherwise be defeated. They say that art is never finished, it can only be walked away from, and I will do just that once I have completed all 1,461 days, or until I am stopped. And if I am, it means that I was widely recognized for this work, and isn't that accomplishment enough? For now, I take great pride in being recognized by you, and so let's get into 1,461 Days of Ignoring the Trump administration, days 383 through 389. This week on the show, On day 383, I talk about actor Sean Penn's greatest role, which remains his portrayal of high school student Jeff Spicoli in the problematic film Fast Times at Ridgemont High. One of his character's lines has stuck with me over the decades, and I use it on day 383 to explain how Jeff Spicoli is an example of how traditional education and intelligence do not necessarily go hand in hand or hand in Mr. Hand. I also mention Mr. Pizza Guy. On day 384, I talk about the car club that meets at the P every Saturday and how it reminds me that people ignore meaningless social division if they have interests and values in common. I sometimes get the impression that society is beginning to more openly tolerate racism and bigotry in this current climate, and so when I see real-world camaraderie, it reassures me that my faith in the car club over the Supreme Court of the United States is well placed. On day 385, I talk about lying and liars and how being an effective liar does not require intellect, it requires shamelessness. Some people are born into an environment where shamelessness is considered a character trait to be encouraged and developed. I do not think you will be surprised about who I attribute this skill to. Of course, as usual, I also point out why we need to suffer this indignity for now so we can recognize these nefarious actors in the future. On day 386, I indulge in a little pettiness after realizing that the leader of the Trump administration has never beaten a man for the presidency. He has only beaten women, and I will leave that right there. But really, you know it must bother him that he could only win if he was running against a woman. Again, I realize this is petty, but I do get a kick out of imagining how irritated Donald gets when his masculinity is on the line. On day 387, I explain why I have been feeling even more optimistic than usual lately, despite what I see as increasing depravity from the leader of the Trump administration. I argue that accelerating towards the bottom means arriving more quickly at the point where people collectively decide they have had enough. I bring pop culture to bear in the conversation as well when I invoke the fictional trope of the Django Freeman-Calvin Candy relationship. On day 388, I talk about how hateful, angry, and vengeful behavior often originates in hateful, angry, and vengeful environments. If you haven't heard of Senate candidate James Tallarico of Texas, you will today, as I use him as a jumping off point to reflect on how your vote is an expression of personal values and identity. I also continue to express hope for those people who cannot hold themselves accountable, because without accountability, there cannot be change, and some people need to change. We wrap up the week on day 389 when I respond to a cynical comment I saw about Pete Buttigieg's growing role in supporting Democratic candidates around the country. I am not a fan of cynicism, as you may have guessed by now. I argue that Pete's ability to communicate with a wide range of people is exactly what is needed in an extremely polarized society. I also bring up that Pete is gay because it always gets brought up by big, bigoted dum-dums. Luckily, Pete doesn't use rhetoric like mine. I have mentioned Bruce Springsteen on the past 2 episodes for relevant reasons, but today I am mentioning him for a petty one. I am a practically lifelong fan of The Howard Stern Show, and I was listening this week when it was brought up that Howard's producer, Gary Dell'Abate, aka Baba Booey, was at several of Bruce's recent New York City shows. The reason this is notable is because while Gary has worked with Bruce in a professional capacity many times related to the show, he is also a Bruce mega fan. Unfortunately, Gary is not too well versed on where the line exists with that, and so was stationed in the pit just in front of the stage, where he attempted to slap Bruce on the back as Bruce performed near where the up-close portion of the general admission crowd was standing. If you know anything about Howard, you know he immediately questioned why his producer, who Bruce knows professionally, would be acting like a superfan, especially when Bruce is performing, and would likely see Gary there and wonder, hey, isn't that Howard Stern's producer? While Howard was getting down to the details of all this, Gary immediately denied trying to slap Bruce on the back. Right on cue, video evidence surfaced that was even more embarrassing than described. Gary reached out, and as Bruce passed by, ignoring him, Gary got his paw on Bruce's back, and then with a satisfied look of glee on his face, Gary gave his friend standing next to him a big thumbs up, as if to say, mission accomplished. I realize many or most might think, what's the big deal, Josh? And or, why is Howard such a curmudgeon? Well, I can understand those points of view, and that is what Gary says too. I doubt Bruce himself would care either, but I get the embarrassment. Bruce is at work. He is doing his job. For Gary to create even a microsecond, even if it is a subconscious microsecond of Bruce being confused like, wait, I know that guy, is unprofessional and tone-deaf. But frankly, it is also just fun to goof on Gary, and that is most of why I told this story. I guess if there is a lesson here for you, it is not to call me while I am recording this podcast. I'll see you on the other side. Day 383 of 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. I am not a self-help guru. I'm just trying to help myself. One of my favorite lines from the notorious 1982 film Fast Times at Ridgemont High was the carefree line that Jeff Spicoli, as portrayed by Sean Penn, says when he is escorted into Mr. Hand's classroom after being found at the food machines. Jeff says, "Hey, wait a minute, there's no birthday party for me here." Jeff is dressed in a fully opened, button-down shirt revealing his bare chest, and most notably, a bagel is tucked into his waistband. I have always wanted a physique that allowed me to walk around with a bagel in my waistband. Maybe someday. One reason I find this line so great is because when you think about it, Jeff was told there was a birthday party for him in this classroom. Not a surprise party, which might seem plausible in Jeff's mind, but a birthday party, meaning that instead of Mr. Hand teaching his normal class, he had instead decided to throw Jeff a birthday party, which Jeff was now late to. Thinking about it this way sort of explains Mr. Pizza Guy's appearance later. But I digress. My point here, and how this relates to the leader of the Trump administration and the Trump administration, is about education. Even though Jeff is portrayed as sort of stupid, he is actually incredibly street smart, wise, and likable. I contrast Jeff's character and demeanor with the leader of the Trump administration, and even with the questionable characters in our Supreme Court. These are all people who hold degrees, in some cases, many degrees, and in many cases, from the most elite institutions. This indicates to me that these people were all good at going to school, doing homework, and writing papers. In fact, all one really has to do at one of these schools is to be just good enough at doing this to squeak by. I do not believe that going to class and doing homework and writing papers indicates intelligence. All it indicates to me is that a person is good at going to class, doing homework, and writing papers. Jeff was not good at going to class, as we now know. He was good at surfing and hanging out at the food machines. But Jeff dispenses real wisdom throughout Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And so, if there was going to be a leader I could endorse over the leader of the Trump administration, it would be someone who is street smart, like Jeff Spicoli, instead of someone who barely passes in what I consider a slanted system of education. Unfortunately, Jeff is a fictional character, so I will just have to go back to ignoring the Trump administration. Day 384 of 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. I am not a self-help guru. I'm just trying to help myself. In 1826, if a Cybertruck pulled up next to a horse-drawn carriage, the coachman would turn and say, "Wow, what an ugly piece of shit." I think about the car club that meets here at the P every Saturday. I am usually here doing some writing, and I notice this group. I see black men, I see white men, I see young men, I see old men. I overhear their conversations. They're very friendly and talkative, and they jump over to the coffee station to refill their coffee. They talk to the workers here at the P, and it's all very lighthearted. I don't hear anything about politics, but what I do hear between the lines is that if somehow, some way, society reverts back to a place where discrimination is openly and widely tolerated, then openly and widely mandated, I believe that there is just no way that these dudes are going to decide to go along with that and break up their awesome little group for some stupid old ass white motherfuckers in Washington, D.C. Oh, I don't want to leave out Clarence. He's a stupid motherfucker, too. I was a teenager when Anita Hill testified against him. That made me think he was awful since the early 90s. But anyway, that is my hope, and that is what I am relying on. People in modern society are used to getting along with other people around them, no matter who they are or what they are, because that is how we find joy during the shared human condition of being born just to rot back into the earth. The Supreme Court is a club with black members, and even though the consequences that come out of that club are immeasurable against whatever consequences come out of a car club, somehow I don't think the justices would tolerate intolerance among each other either. Although I can see some of the stupid ass old white motherfuckers crying reverse racism, which to me, my opinion, does not exist. One of these days, the bad people who can't stand the joy of others will scamper back under their rocks, and we will be better for what we have learned. I am grateful for that education and for continuing to ignore the Trump administration. Day 385 of 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. I am not a self-help guru. I'm just trying to help myself. It does not require intelligence to be a successful liar. What it does take, and this is important to note, is an ability to live without shame. Most people are not successful at lying because their shame catches up with them when they try to stand behind their lies. The shame begins to show, first in words, then in body language, then in remorse. But if you are a person that is born into shamelessness and encouraged to develop it as a character trait, you can lie for a lifetime and learn how to use that skill to get whatever you want from people who do not have the skills to counter someone who is without shame. It's like a superpower. I don't need to name the leader of the Trump administration here. Maybe I'm referring to him, maybe I'm not. What I will name, however, is something I have named for many of these days. We need to witness and go through this period of history as a people because we, as the current living residents of this country and the world, have not been properly exposed to the rot that can exist among humanity. And now we are. We are seeing behavior that treats us in a way in which we are openly considered to be worth less than our actual value, and this treatment is coming from the very people who are supposed to be doing the exact opposite. They are hired by us and paid by us to look out for our best interests, and instead, it seems, that they are trying to protect their own. We have to get to the bottom before we can go back to the top. We need all of the information. The original sins of this country were never atoned for, and I say it not for content, but for context. Voting actually matters. It's not performative, and personally, I think it should be mandatory. What needs to happen is that the 1/3 of this country that does not vote has to recognize that they need to vote, and not because it's mandated, but because they mandate it for themselves. Pick flick, like in that movie Election, where I think she is the bad guy, right? I don't remember. What is important is that in the movie, the high school kids vote, and we adults need to do the same in order to restore shame. I am looking forward to the upcoming election and seeing much more of the voting population. Until then, it's no lie, I will be here ignoring the Trump administration. Day 386 of 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. I am not a self-help guru. I'm just trying to help myself. I don't mind being petty when it's someone who demands being petty for. Isn't petty for a word unto itself? I believe it is. I think it's some sort of bite-sized confection that you eat at an English afternoon tea. Getting back to the point, I learned something the other day that really just made me smile, and that is the fact that the leader of the Trump administration has never beaten a man for the presidency. He ran against Hillary Clinton and beat her. He ran against Kamala Harris and beat her. But when he ran against Joe Biden, he did not win, no matter what he says. The only person he ever lost a presidential election to was a man. Now, again, this is completely petty, but I think it is also pretty goddamn funny considering how this particular dude, the leader of the Trump administration, is probably one of the only dudes who would even care about this. And when you think about it, you know he would care about it a lot. I would love it if he doesn't even realize it and then somehow finds out, because he will become obsessed, just like he's obsessed with Barack Obama and his presidency and his popularity and his approval ratings and so on. I feel like if his mind started to wrap around the fact that he has never and will never beat a man for the presidency, that thought would consume him. And frankly, we are at a point in our history where it's probably to our benefit for his thoughts to be consumed by something like this, because as he seems to become more and more obsessive about issues that do not benefit our daily lives, it becomes more and more obvious to me that it would be better if he dedicated his thinking to something that didn't offer quite the same level of negative consequences for the nation. Think about how you've never beaten a man, Donald, and I will think about ignoring the Trump administration. Day 387 of 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. I am not a self-help guru. I'm just trying to help myself. I am feeling incredibly positive these days, more so than usual, because as you know, I remain mindful, optimistic, and hopeful as we get through these 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. But really, I have been feeling even more positive than usual because of what I see as depravity out of this dude and how I see it increasing. Now, you may ask, what? Well, when you drive faster, you get to the destination more quickly, and the destination here, as I have said all along, and don't take it the wrong way, the destination is the bottom. There is only so far this can go. Now, if the planet and all of its inhabitants are completely obliterated, well, it's been nice knowing you, but I don't see that happening. So, at some point, we will reach a wall before that occurs, when the people decide, you know what, I'm not into this. And when I say the people, I don't mean left, right, middle, Democrat, Republican, or anything else. I just mean all of us that get up every day and do what we gotta do. And after a while, we start to decide, this kind of divisive rhetoric, this kind of anger, this kind of attempt to make our lives more difficult instead of easier is not acceptable. It's just not acceptable. But as I have pointed out, to get to that resolve, we need to get to the destination. And while some may believe differently than I, and grammar wise, I really mean some people believe differently than me, I will not be shaken from the idea that being shown this level of depravity is good for us because it allows us to fully see in the naked light of day what we do not want to be. We couldn't see that fully before. Without any kind of accountability and reparations for how this country was founded, we were always living under a sort of shroud where we really weren't exposed to how some of our fellow human beings can be to one another. And the vast majority of us today don't like it. In more pop culture terms, be a Django, not a Calvin Candy. Support cultural, moral, and ideological integration, and keep on ignoring the Trump administration. Day 388 of 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. I am not a self-help guru. I'm just trying to help myself. Hateful, angry, vengeful people become hateful, angry, vengeful people because they are raised in hateful, angry, vengeful environments. I love studying human behavior, and when I see hateful, angry, vengeful behavior from the leader of the Trump administration and the Trump administration, I am chagrined that the target and or targets of that hateful, angry, vengeful behavior must suffer. But I am also at the same time fascinated with the subjects who lash out. They tell a story when they do this, and I am the kind of person who wants to hear that story. People who are happy and satisfied in life, but who also understand that life can take dark turns at any moment, and that we all of us, need to always look inward and grow from our mistakes. These people do not make fun of other people. They do not betray other people. They do not seek to demean other people because they wouldn't want the same done unto them. They also attach a part of their self-esteem and character to how they lift up others in this short dance called life. This is James Tallarico. He is the Democratic nominee for Senate from Texas. I personally believe that who you vote for represents who you are. This is a double-edged sword because so many people just click the lever for the candidate that represents the party that they have grown up supporting, while others are more interested in what I said a moment ago. Some people attach a part of their self-esteem and character to who they choose to vote for, and unfortunately that means that some people end up voting for the candidate that represents hate, anger, and vengeance. Some will even go as far as to vote for that person because they have convinced themselves that holding a person accountable for acting hateful, angry, and vengeful is actually an act of hate, anger, and vengeance itself. That is a lie. Unfortunately, I have no way to help a person like that, but I feel like I understand how they got that way. So I will always hope that person can change. In the meantime, I will continue to enjoy watching how people like these behave as part of the population, and I will continue to ignore the Trump administration. Day 389 of 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. I am not a self-help guru. I'm just trying to help myself. Cynicism helps. How? I was scrolling this morning and happened upon a CNN article, and to be clear, I would never tune into that goddamn channel, but I happened to scroll past an article someone had reposted about how Pete Buttigieg is becoming a prolific endorser of Democrats throughout the nation, which gives some clues to his future. Of course, just beneath was a rambling comment calling Pete's work textbook political maneuvering in an attempt to stack up endorsements not to strengthen the Democratic Party. They went on to say it was only about collecting political favors to cash in on a future debate stage. I mean, duh. That is one result, but only a cynic assumes that Pete's motivation is not righteous, and so I replied, cynicism helps how? It doesn't. The fact of the matter is, Pete Buttigieg is one of the most effective speakers on behalf of sanity out there, not even for the Democratic Party necessarily, but for the Sanity Party. He has spent years speaking to everybody, famously and consistently going on Fox News not to get into fights, not to stoke division, but simply to expound on sanity, to counter narratives with sanity, to speak to the state of the nation with sanity. Pete is good at speaking to anybody and everybody from what I've seen. I believe that in 2028, you better know how to speak to everybody or no one's going to be listening to whatever the fuck you have to say. Now, of course, there is the voice that says, but Pete is gay. Well, look, the fact of the matter is everyone, and I mean everyone, knows someone who is gay, and more likely, most everyone has someone who is gay in their family. That is a reality of life at this point in 2026. And guess what, dum-dums? Gay people have always existed, and I won't get into all of the other marginalized groups that have always existed that you just haven't been paying attention to because they have been living under your radar so they can avoid abuse. They've existed too. Pete's sexuality could be a hurdle to overcome for the nation, but we can get over anything after 1,461 days of ignoring the Trump administration. Hi, it's Josh. I am biased because I am a gay man, but I feel and believe that anybody who points to Pete's sexuality as a reason for not supporting him is actually telling on themselves. I know the argument that I make, and that is generally made since the proliferation of gay rights, is that everyone knows someone who is gay, but I will take it further and say that everyone is gay because either you protest being labeled because you have a hang-up, or you don't care about being labeled because you don't. The point being, labels are a ridiculous invention only meant to divide us, and as with so many topics discussed on this show, I don't like it. Thanks again for listening. Please leave a 5-star rating or review for the 1,461 Days of Ignoring with Josh Bloom podcast in your podcast player, and leave a comment saying that you like the show. If you feel like leaving a comment about the leader of the Trump administration that says something like, even though I don't believe in labels, I feel compelled to say that Donald Trump is a big homo anyway, then you go right ahead and you do that. Please tell a politically curious friend about the show, and while you are at it, please follow me on all of my social media by going to superjews.com. That's superjews.com, where you will find the links that you are looking for. If you would like to throw some support to me and the show, please subscribe to my Substack. Go to superjews.substack.com and just enter your email address. I would appreciate that immensely. A link is in the show notes. You can also buy me a coffee. For a mere $3, you will earn my undying gratitude, or at least enough gratitude to last until the next time I ask you to buy me a coffee. Go to buymeacoffee.com/Josh Bloom. Lastly, my book about psych-pop icons and Elephant Six co-founding band The Apples in stereo is also available now. Choose your preferred bookseller at applesbook.com. We are living in trying times that are trying to take our time away from living. My reason for doing this show is to remain mindful, optimistic, and hopeful so I can reclaim that time, regain my mind, and focus on what is important. I am not a self-help guru. I'm just trying to help myself. See you next time. Bye.